And I'd like you to consider an exercise in your church whenever you have a group of people gathered together. What I'm going to suggest is that you give each person a length of wire about 2 feet long and to ask them to bend that wire in the shape of their spiritual journeys through life. Because what I found is people in mostly the mainline Protestant faiths don't do a very good job about sharing their spiritual lives. And the wire exercise is very powerful. Sometimes when people share their journeys, they weep. And they look at each other in total disbelief and say, I never, ever knew that about you before. So as you can imagine, most people's wires are all twisted and turned and convoluted. But one time, a young woman's wire remained completely flat, except for a little bump in the middle. And she said, this little bump is when I got married and my husband tried to convince me to become a member of his faith. And she said, I tried and I tried so hard, but it just wasn't who I was. Now, she said, for these flat areas, I flirted with a number of other religions along the way, but do you know what she said? They didn't bend my wire. And so I believe when we join a community of faith, of whatever faith tradition, it should change our lives in some fundamental way. But I don't believe that the church or clergy or lay leaders state emphatically or often enough that this will indeed happen. Because I believe people come to church seeking a connection to God and a life of greater meaning and purpose. So this reminds me of a minister who, by all outward appearances, was successful. His church had grown, it was financially stable, and everyone thought he had a very positive, successful ministry, and he did. But in those dark hours at night, he had a shallow and gnawing feeling in his heart that something was just missing, and he was tempted to leave the ministry. But instead, he preached a sermon to his congregation one Sunday, and he said, I want to be a different kind of person, but I just don't know how to do that. And in the receiving line following that sermon, there was an outpouring of feelings and emotion from many of his congregants who said they felt the same way, that they yearned to be some kind of people, but didn't know how to do that. So a very lengthy period of soul searching came as a result of that sermon. And the minister also became a chaplain to a juvenile detention facility a mile or so down the road. And a very powerful ministry developed to that juvenile jail, is what it actually was. And the church gained the reputation of being the last place families stopped before they went in, and the first place they stopped when they came out. And this church began giving away the Sunday offering to support that ministry, which is something I encourage anyway. So to me, church at times should engage us in what I call spark plug or lightning bolt moments. I think sometimes a church should grab us by our lapels and yank us out of our day-to-day lives and take us to a place we've never been before. So I like churches that have a sense of adventure. I think this is wonderfully contagious. People want to go to church because there's something interesting going on. But all too often I feel like people don't want to go to church because they feel like they've pretty much seen it all. So one other way to get to this issue is to ask people to write down what they yearn for in the life of their congregations. I think you'll find their responses are very powerful. I've heard people yearn for a willingness of their congregation to live more boldly. They say they wish they weren't so well established in the middle of the road, and they wish they took risks from time to time. Sadly, I've read surveys that show that churchgoers and the unchurched alike live virtually identical lives. Virtually identical lives. So that begs the question, what difference does the church make? Something like 50% of Christians nationwide are relatively inert. I think it's because they don't believe the church will change their life in any meaningful way. So my friends, the life of Jesus was powerful and compelling. Let's make our churches reflect his true spirit.